Reload your 3-bladed sword. Get comfortable in your studded leather kirtle or your chainmail bikini. Fire up the wizard van, it's about to get weird. Welcome to Swords Against Madness, my personal fusion of solo, old-school role-playing game and weird fiction storytelling. I'm playing Swords and Wizardry, a modern retelling of the 1974 through 1977 original rules to Dungeons & Dragons, mixed with a few solo gaming tools like the Mythic Game Master emulator. First I play the game, and then I turn it into a psychedelic story for your enjoyment. There are no special rules here to protect the characters. No fudging and no rerolls. These dungeons could get deadly pretty fast. But I'll try and keep it what passed for PG back when I was a kid in the 1980s. If you didn't hear it on Goonies, Gremlins, or Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, you won't hear it here. Now get ready to party like it's 1974, with Swords Against Madness. Rayya struggled with confusion. Her thoughts kept crashing against each other. Contradictory, confusing, hazy. Nothing seemed to quite make sense. Every time she argued with herself, the side that seems like it should win didn't. Her head swam as she watched Mormot play with the controls of the alien device on the console just in front of the window where she could see Miria and Olan bound below her. After a moment, he looked up at her, and for a while, the uncertainty melted away. There was blissful silence in her head, at least for the time being.
There, that should do it. Now I have a big decision to make. I like to talk out my thoughts when I can. Will you listen for me, Rayya? Of course. What's on your mind, cousin?
This didn't feel right. The bland smile she could feel plastered across her face felt like a mask. Something in her rose against her gullet, but refused to come out.
I have just made a small fortune today, and I'm proud to say I'm about to make another one. The question is, which fortune do I want to make? How do you mean? Well, you see, the church is terribly afraid that they're going to lose the grip on the locals if Miria does in fact awaken the all-knowing. And so they wanted to put an end to that, and they hired me to do it. They didn't particularly care which way, so long as she didn't make it to the tower. But aren't you part of the Brotherhood? Used to be. That was before I found all of this. And more. Surely your faith was shaken by Miria's little speech on the beach, wasn't it? I never really believed the Starmen were divine. I didn't see them as that different from the church. Except the Order of Stars didn't want to turn me into a broodmare for a drunken merchant. Huh, is that what really turned you? Never mind, no judgments. You don't need to tell me. Out there in the jungle there's a man who calls himself the Master. He found the first of a bunch of buried caches about the island. Not a crashed starship like Miria's, but something intentionally buried and hidden here. He was looking for a friend, and he brought me into his trust. Showed me that the Traci, if that's what they're really called, were nothing more than a pack of thieves buying and selling used technology from a universe out there. A whole universe of people. They were nothing special, and everything about my religion was a way to get value out of me. So I walked from the Brotherhood. Eventually I figured out what the Master was up to, and I walked away from him too. He's a fool. I can't say as though the church wants to use me as a broodmare. That sounds horrible. But for all their talk of salvation and enlightenment, they're really only there to use people. Everybody here is just playing a crooked game for the hearts and the minds of the villagers. From our newfound settlers, to our holy men, to the gods themselves. I don't see why I ought to be any different. There was big money in sabotaging the Brotherhood. And now here I have her, the emissary of the stars herself. The question is, what do I do with her now? And what are you thinking of doing with her?
Rayya toyed with the dagger on her hilt uneasily. She had trusted Miria. She had beaten the tar out of a man for that thing. Something wasn't right. Some thought screamed in the back of her head, dying for attention, and then faded away.
Nothing like that, if that's what you're thinking. Ugh. I've seen enough of what these aliens are capable of. I wasn't about to let her have anything hidden on her person. Believe you me, I have very little prurient interest in her. No, my motives are financial. Financial? How do you mean? Well, I did what the church asked, and I have some gold coins coming to me. But perhaps I could persuade them that for a few more they want her for themselves, to get the evidence they need to disprove the theory that these Trassi are gods. Or I could sell her to the master. He is fascinated with alien technology, but he only half understands it. And she's already mentioned this carver being that he's obsessed with. Maybe he can use her to get more power. Or I could hold her for ransom. The Brotherhood of the Stars has a few coins, and I wouldn't mind getting access to some of the books I was forbidden from when I was an acolyte. They might trade a lot to see their all-knowing awakened in the end. Of course, I'd burn my church contacts on that one. I also happen to know that a certain individual in town makes a little bit of money on the side selling and buying slaves from pirates who visit the south side of the island. I expect a woman of her knowledge and expertise could be very, very valuable. Or maybe I should just enslave her myself. Use magic to get her to do what I wish. Although that could be very hard, her mind is trained. But if I did, perhaps I could convince her to teach me how to use the strange devices in this building. The metal men and the weapons of glass. And just now, an even more delicious possibility has occurred to me.
Rayya stared through the window at her two companions on the floor below. She definitely didn't like everything she was hearing. Miria wasn't exactly a good friend, but she didn't deserve that, did she? Some thought in her head told her that if that's what Mormot thought, maybe that was right, and that made her very uneasy.
So what's this other possibility?
Mormot pointed straight up, a wan grin crossing his face.
If somebody shot her down, they must really hate her, and the odds are that they're still up there. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't own this little cave of mine. I'm willing to bet that they might trade me all the knowledge I want, or even passage among the stars, in exchange for this little enemy of theirs.
Rayya bit her lip and shook for a moment, the conflicting feelings fulminating inside her head.
I'm willing to bet any one of those could give me a substantial profit. What would you do if you were me?
Rayya could taste blood as she bit her lip. For a moment she was her usual self. Her fists balled tight, and then she looked at Mormot, and everything relaxed. The part of her screaming in the back of her head faded. She smiled, and began to think. My party is finding themselves in one hell of a predicament right now. Rayya is currently under the influence of Charm Person, a spell that has changed a lot through the various editions of Dungeons & Dragons. When I gather that they were even considering removing in the next edition of Dungeons & Dragons due out next month. In the editions I grew up on, Charm Person caused the target to treat you like you were their best and most trusted friend, and lasted for a good long time. Your intelligence score determined how often you could roll a saving throw to try and break out of the control. If you were issued self-destructive suggestions or asked to do something completely out of your own character, you got an additional saving throw. Otherwise, the spell was limited to what the character would do for a friend. But in Swords and Wizardry, which is a take on the earliest version of Dungeons & Dragons, there is no such limitation. Your target gets a saving throw, and if they fail that saving throw, they are under your influence. You can control them as you need to. And the target remains under the caster's control until the spell is broken. But that doesn't mean that Rayya is necessarily a robot under Mormot's control. She has inner conflicts. She has feelings and intentions of her own. and she can feel conflicted. If Mormot is out of the picture, then she's free to act as she sees fit, and the player side of me is counting on that to get my character back. We'll see how it goes. In the meantime, Mythic GM Emulator has put me in a very interesting location indeed. I'd originally planned on having Mormot hole up in some kind of pirate fort, or maybe a cave, or a complex of small tree houses located somewhere deep in the jungle. When I rolled to get the details, on the other hand, I got Celebrate Opposition as the description for this dungeon. I racked my brains for a few minutes on that one, and then it came to me. This could be the place where the Gorum are being celebrated. In other words, this could be the Tracy dealership for immortal space barbarian warriors. A showroom, arena, and place to wheel and deal. I loved that idea immediately and decided to run with it. I ended up creating a simple 5-room dungeon, based mostly on my experience with car dealerships. There's a flashy showroom where you can watch the Gorum do their thing, take them for a test drive. There's a place to keep the Gorum, a series of cryo chambers similar to the ones that the Master keeps getting his Gorum out of. And because you need to see how the Gorum fight, maybe a shop with a few robots programmed to simulate combat with them, and that are powerful enough to put them down if they get out of line. Which means the audience has to be able to watch from a safe distance, of course. I imagine something like a glass-shielded opera box to look down on the Gorum as they fought. And finally, you're going to need an office, some place to crunch the numbers, to schmooze and wheel and deal, some place to show off your good taste. And so the final room is a fancy lounge for making the final bargains. It was also obvious that the rooms would need to be in something of a loop so that you could get to the robots. And so, starting at 12 o'clock, I placed the arena/showroom. Then at 3 o'clock, I positioned the cryo chamber full of merchandise. At 6 o'clock, an elevated entrance with windows overlooking the arena, as well as a place to meet and greet people near the front door. At 8 o'clock, I put a comfortable lounge full of couches, pieces of art, and a little bit of currency. And at 10 o'clock, the robot room, stocked with some high-tech weaponry and some battle automata, whose stats will also be available in the show notes. As this place has been sitting here for 400 years and is getting a little run down, I added a second entrance, a hole in the wall in the cryo chamber. A little detail I added on a whim that turned out to be very, very important as the story moves on. But that's as close as I'm going to get to spoilers. Why don't we go back to the action so you can see it for yourself? Hello, I'm your anchorman Toby Dampt, here to tell you about Transreal News. What's this? You need to tell them about Transreal News? Clee, I'm in the middle of something here.
I think it's a wonderful idea, explaining exactly what we do here, Toby.
Thank you, Walter, but I'm trying to do this live. Oh, that's simply marvelous, Toby. That gives me an opportunity to steal the screen from you. Clee, shouldn't you be working on your advisories? We do have a broadcast to do in just a few minutes.
Well, doesn't that make the timing a little difficult on your part, Toby?
Well, it wouldn't be if I didn't keep getting interrupted. I just want to tell people about Transreal News.
Ha! Foolish primitive! I can tell you exactly what Transreal News is. It's a show where a bunch of shills and liars create a podcast trying to tell people what's going on ever since reality broke down and time and space became distorted.
Shills? Liars? I resemble that remark, darling.
I will run you through, Maxwell.
Promises, Torg. Listen, guys, this is important. We tell people about rampaging time barbarians,
We will conquer.
lockdowns in hell, the televistic slime that's slowly eating the noosphere. Sure, we have to run ads and look out for what the authorities tell us to say and not to say, but that doesn't mean we're not valid journalists.
Here, here, Toby. Somebody's got to warn them about the strange reality storms coming in, or the rampaging monsters across Australia, or
the ultra-violent time barbarians trying to murder their own ancestors to make themselves stronger.
Do not speak of which you don't understand, fool. That's enough, guys. For crying out loud, I'm trying to look professional here. Tune into Transreal News for the most important news, advisories, and forecasts for people traveling the astral plane and beyond. Anywhere where you get your finest podcasts.
Calmec held his breath and gripped his sword tight as he crept down the first couple of stairs and listened carefully to Rayya and Mormot. It was clear that there was something wrong with Rayya. He'd heard stories from his grandfather about wizards who could control your mind, to turn someone into their unwitting but seemingly willing slave. It seems that that's what happened to Rayya. Good, he thought to himself. He was still out to punish her, and punish her he would. In the meantime, she probably deserved everything she got. And to him it was one more piece of proof to show how degenerate, backwards, and hateful the Brotherhood of the Stars had to be. Could it be that they were controlling the village with mind control the whole time? The possibility was fascinating to him, and he couldn't wait to report back to his church brethren. It also meant he'd have to be circumspect. He did not want to be seen or caught out in the open. Calmec might not have been much of a warrior, and he might not have much experience, but he learned something of cunning and dungeoneering at his grandfather's knee. Before he had crept down and started listening to the conversation, he'd already scouted around, and he had found a hole in their defenses. A literal hole in this case. Behind a few rocks, a place where the dirt was thin and pieces of metal had been exposed to the elements and slowly corroded away. A rusty wound about 3 feet across. And so long as the chainmail he was wearing served him well, he should be able to squeeze through it without getting a nasty case of lockjaw. He backed up the stairs as quietly as he'd come down them, and slowly swung around. He would get them from an angle they didn't expect. Then he would run that sorcerer through before he had time to put a spell on him. Then he could take advantage of what would doubtless be a moment of confusion to extract sweet revenge on Rayya for his sore, swollen face, stolen dagger, and wounded ego. He carefully brushed away some of the most jagged rust with the butt of his sword. Then, trusting to the thickness of his fencing gloves, he slowly lowered himself down into the pit. It was a shock when he entered it. Inside was absolutely frigid. His body jerked involuntarily at the sudden change in temperature, and he nearly fell. He caught his footing on some kind of flexible hose, and balanced on it for a moment before it tore free, hissing and filling the air with mist as he tumbled to the floor. He picked himself up quickly and drew his blade, holding his breath for a moment to see if Rayya and the sorcerer would come rushing after him. Nothing yet, although suddenly there was a blinking red light where he swore there wasn't one when he first entered. It made it harder for his eyes to adapt to the strange environment. It took him a moment to realize that he was in a chamber with dozens upon dozens of pillars of glass covered in frost. A distillery, perhaps? He walked to the nearest one and wiped it off carefully, and then jumped back, clutching his chest as his heart gave a start. Inside, floating in some kind of fluid, was one of the Gorum. Its hateful, sharp-fanged and skull-like face had a strange attitude of rest about it. It seemed almost peaceful, like some child's hideous doll. And then its eyes snapped open and he took a few steps away, tripping over another hose and pulling it loose. Another hiss, another plume of mist. He got himself to his feet and gripped his blade, but he could see no way for the creature to get out. No, he had vengeance to settle. He turned and looked at the 2 doors opposite him. Both were made of some kind of painted metal, and both had small windows in them. The one on the left had a stairwell visible through it. That one was the road to vengeance. He set his jaw and advanced, paying no heed to the stirring in the tank behind him. Nor could he hear over the hiss the sound of an alien voice beginning a countdown. Once Rayya had helped him make up his mind, it was easy for Mormot to figure out how to work the communication systems on the console. Logical problems were the one thing that Mormot never had trouble figuring out, the one thing that never disappointed him. And thanks to Rayya, he even had a name to work with.
I wish to speak to Yanghu,
he bellowed into the console.
Yanghu of the Trossi, connect me to Yanghu. A man with a proposition, and something of great value. I want to speak to Yanghu.
There was a moment's silence, and then the great holographic head of Yanghu appeared above the console. Mormot somehow managed to will himself not to step back as the apparition appeared.
Who dares interrupt me in my business? You're not Miria. What are you doing in my showroom, maggot?
Yanghu, I presume. My name is Mormot, and I have a business proposition for you.
I have no interest in anything you have to offer, Primitive. The only bargain I offer you is step out of my facility, and I'll let you escape with your life. That offer is a very limited time, however.
Are you sure you don't want to bargain? I have for sale your enemy, the woman who calls herself Miria.
Nosy irradiated hustlers are not my business. Keeping my Gorum safe, that is my business. I'll tell you what. Flee now and leave Miria in place, and I won't hunt you down and wear your ugly human face as a codpiece. I will give you 3 minutes to comply.
The head of Yanghu disappeared, and flashing red sigils popped up all over the console. Mormot cursed his luck.
Bad call indeed.
He quickly began gathering up the things he had spread out about this place in his few months of hiding here trying to unlock its secrets. Best to cut his losses while he still could. The less damage to the place he left behind, the less likely it was that he was going to be hunted down. That's when he heard the crash and the hiss from the next room.
Damnation, this is all I need for that creature to think I've wrecked his place out of spite. Rayya, go see what that was.
Rayya nodded, drew her saber, and descended the steps carefully. The thrill of a potential fight washed away all of her doubts. This felt good. This felt right. High up in space, a Trossi combat squad piled into a dropship, its pilot locking onto the dealership facility coordinates that Yanghu provided. After months of growing soft on SimSense and alcohol, even hunting down some tree-hugging primitive and perforating him seemed like an exciting break from the everyday. The pilot, a scaly reptiloid by the name of Shosk, quickly flipped through the pre-flight check, desperate to get into the drop. He was about to hit the button to begin the airlock sequence when Yanghu's face appeared on the screen in front of him.
Wait. Before you go, Shosk, I have one additional security measure I would like you to take.
Miria breathed a quiet prayer of thanks to the Void, for islanders so primitive they couldn't figure out how to unclasp her wrist computer. She kneeled in her underwear, her arms splayed wide by her side, captured in a pair of hovering mage cuffs, canisters meant to keep her fingers from being able to flex so that she could conjure the warp. But for all that Rayya had stripped her down to her skivvies, she still couldn't get that computer off, and Mormont had run out of patience. Then more kindly she thanked the Void for humble island boys, as Olan, who was kneeling beside her, fully clothed in a pair of more conventional manacles, had not looked at her once since he came to, allowing her dignity and her privacy. He had instead gone about pulling several lockpicks he'd had secreted about his clothing that not even Rayya or Mormot could find, and had begun working diligently on the manacles wrapped around his wrist. Close enough to the end to finally speak, he let out a sigh. I just don't understand why Rayya turned on us. For Mormot? We barely know Mormot. He's one of the biggest jerks on the island. Nobody wants to get to know Mormot. I'd have trusted Rayya with my life. She saved it at least twice.
Don't take it so personal, Olan.
Olan gave her a single sideward glance, blushed, and went back to picking his locks.
She's under a mind control spell. So long as it's in effect, she's going to have to do what Mormot tells her to.
What, really? I've never heard of a spell doing that before.
It's a pretty common trick. Frighteningly easy to do, actually. and one I learned from a trashy warp slinger ages ago, which means it spread all through the Syndicate. And if the Syndicate knows it, there's a good chance that somewhere your Brotherhood has learned it too.
In all the stories about the Brotherhood, I've never heard of them taking control of a monster or anything.
It only works on people. That is, things that think and have a sense of self, and are more or less shaped like you and me. I doubt they'd have much use for it. Probably archived it away for people like Mormot to occasionally stumble across. Or if they did use it a lot, I don't think they'd advertise it. It's not exactly a power that inspires trust, you know what I mean? I'm kind of ashamed I even know it, to be honest. But it has gotten me out of a few very scary situations.
So how do we get her out of it?
You can only be controlled by one person at a time. If I could cast it on her, I could then break it and set her free. Or we could force Mormot to do it. I don't know about you, but I think I'd really enjoy finding a way to make him let go of that spell.
Hold on. There. Free at last. Olan's manacles clattered to the ground. He nursed his wrist for just a moment, then pulled a scarf off of himself and cast it over Miria like a shawl. Now let's see if I can get you out of there. Miria didn't have much hope, but she didn't say that. Besides, she was too busy looking up. Something had changed up on the console. Lights were flashing. Mormot was alone. He still hadn't even seemed to notice that Olan was standing up and free. A moment later there was a satisfying click, and she suddenly could move her hand again, as one of the mage cuffs fell to the floor. She flexed her fingers and adjusted herself.
Oh, thank the void. How'd you get so good with locks? Especially modern locks.
That's a very long story, and one I'd be happy to tell you in Another click. Miria's hands were free. She pulled herself to her feet. Olan turned away, giving Miria a little breathing room while she adjusted his scarf into something a little more modest. The room beyond was full of mist, dim lit with flashing red lights. As he squinted through the window, suddenly a pair of shapes whirled across his vision. Sparks flew as blade met blade, and he saw Rayya fending off an angry Kalmek. Steel met steel again, and then the two fell into some kind of grapple. Within a moment, however, his attention turned away from the fight to what was going on behind it. Slowly, one of the great glass cylinders behind the two of them was raising up to reveal a wet, naked Gorum with frost pouring off of its half-frozen body. And then he watched as it slowly, stiffly began pulling itself up. Miria, you had better come see this.
Oh, son of a space marine.
I don't think she sees it.
Then we better get this door open fast.
If we do that, we'll let the Gorum in here, and you're not exactly set to defend yourself.
Let's cross that bridge when we come to it. Right now we've got to get Rayya the hell out of there. Give me your dagger.
Miria hardly waited. She dove and pulled a dagger off of Olan's belt and lunged at a panel next to the door, and ripped it apart with practiced ease. Beneath was a tangle of wires, circuits, and crystals.
If there's one thing I know, it's how to hotwire a bulkhead.
I don't know what that means, but whatever you're doing, you better hurry. The heat from the dropship ignited ferns and palm trees as it set down. The moment it did, the concussive force of its landing blew most of them back out again. Within seconds, there were several gunshot-like pops as explosive bolts released themselves, and a ramp dropped down from the bottom of the dropship. A group of strange armored figures slowly walked down the ramp. Some stood only up to a human's waist. Others would have towered a head above the tallest man. All of them armored in shining plastic and carbon fiber. Their weapons let out a Gaussian whine as they heated up plasma casters and lasers. The strike team leader pulled a pair of goggles over the sides of his Komodo dragon-like head, lighting up the entire jungle as it adjusted his vision to see in ultraviolet. He opened up a taloned hand to reveal a hologram of Mormot's face.
The ape we have been set to kill. Yanghu has also instructed us to eliminate any human females we may find. Hell, just kill all the monkeys.
Thank you so much for listening to Swords Against Madness. Swords Against Madness has been GM'd, played, written, and directed by Brian C. Rideout, and I've done all the voices for this episode. If you enjoyed the podcast and would like to hear a little more, or get information on characters, magic items, spells, and other custom content, visit my homepage at swordsvmadness.stormheadproductions.ca. I love hearing from fans of the show. If you want to reach me, find me on X, where I am at swordsvmadness. And if you want to talk all things role-playing games, check out my blog, deathtrapgames.blogspot.com. Finally, there's nothing I love more than talking shop about podcasting. You can contact me through my coaching and production company, Stormhead Productions, at Stormhead Audio on X or stormheadproductions.ca. I'd love to hear from you, and I'm happy to help you out. Believe me, when it comes to podcasts, I can talk shop all day long. The music for Swords Against Madness was generated by Brian C. Rideout using the Suno AI. And this episode contains sound effects from Pixabay. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, play hard, roll high, and think weird.